So then the Buddha then says, the Buddha responds by describing how the vast evolutionary progression of the Bodhisattva to Buddhahood, over many lives, that is, involves developing so many other beings in the same positive direction over so many lives, that when they finally all become perfect Buddhas, all the beings and their land have become constituted entirely of virtue. In other words, when I was a Bodhisattva, I became a Buddha, this world is perfect for every being in it. None of them, if they really knew, could say that there was something wrong with the environment that doesn't enable them to evolve maximally and optimally should they choose to evolve. And everything is there nudging them to do so, although they may not do so properly, but everything is there nudging, which is like the best of all possible worlds vision, a really crazy vision. So then when Buddha, hearing this, the Buddha's most distinguished monastic disciple present thinks to himself, very enlightened arhat, saint, he says, well, if the world becomes perfect when a Bodhisattva becomes a perfect Buddha, what happened to this world? Since this former Bodhisattva is now supposed to be a perfect Buddha. So he's looking at India in the 6th century before the Common Era and seeing a bunch of dung, a pile of dung, wars, violence, people freaking out, the Trojan War, you know, like the Mahabharata War. A lot of problems looks to him. So what is he talking about? He's saying, this guy's a Buddha. So the Buddha then reads his mind and teases him and then first for a while, but then finally, the Buddha then performs a second piece of performance art to demonstrate. He ceremoniously raises his right foot and places his big toe on the ground. And suddenly everyone sees the world as if it were the utterly perfect place for them to be, each one in the ideal situation for their optimal evolutionary, physical, and spiritual development. Now what do you see? Asked the Buddha, and the monk and everyone else agree that it is utterly perfect. The world is. Then the Buddha lifts up his toe and everyone's perception switches back to seeing the ordinary scene. The remainder of the scripture, sutra, focuses on this paradox between the world as perceived by the enlightened and the world as normally experienced by the unenlightened. My point is this. In this book, we are envisioning how wonderful and positive the world of Tibet, China, and the catastrophically overheating planet could be if those responsible would see the enlightened vision and then act in an enlightened manner. They don't have to attain full enlightenment, though the Dalai Lama may be there already. All they have to do is act as if they are enlightenment. In other words, Buddha is as Buddha does, which I have to confess is my coined phrase. But first seeing, or although I discovered it was an old English proverb, Buddha is as Buddha does. But first seeing or imagining the enlightened, best of all possible worlds is what inspires us all to strive to build it. So let us carry on with imagining the positive, replacing the thought, these good outcomes just aren't possible, with positive images of how indeed they are always possible in as specific detail as we can manage. The Dalai Lama sets an example for us in the context of imagining an ideal Tibet-China situation. Everything he says, does, and thinks comes from his vision of how possible it all is. The secret of his not getting discouraged, because people are always wondering that, remaining patient and determined and even joyful in the midst of not looking away from the misery, is related to this as well. So let us support him by letting ourselves imagine how easily President Hu, his colleagues, and their successors could take the momentous 5 steps presented in the last chapter, which I outlined to you already, as the most realistic solution to all their major problems, and how easily the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people could reciprocate with their 5 steps. And yeah, one thing I didn't mention, so that's it. So I didn't mention the last thing that I had tremendous fun with, but I'm talking to business people about it, and they're having a lot of creative ideas. And that is, you know, the Chinese are business people, and they're doing a lot of business successfully. And Tibet is being very mismanaged by them because they don't know how to live there. They're trying to colonize it. They're trying to drain a lake that is the heart of Tibet that keeps its moisture there, a huge lake. They're draining it through turbines to create enough electric power to create these bubble cities where they can go live, and then they're hoping to fund those by making like a Las Vegas thing. In Lhasa, around the Potala and the Tibetan monasteries, are 376 brothels. There are all kind of casinos and discos, and it's really grubby. And they're bringing Chinese up who, you know, from the fabled middle class of 1 or 200 million people, and they're up spending the Chinese money, but it's just circulating money inside China. The Western people don't like that. They go to Tibet to see some lamas looking happy, some people doing the yak dance. You know, they don't want to see an armed camp and a bunch of, like, you know, Indians on a reservation looking mad and upset and unhappy. You know? And so they're losing their foreign visitors. Almost no foreign visitor goes twice. And some like to leave early when they go nowadays. So, for example, tourist industry. All kinds of industries, health industry. Dalai Lama wants Tibet to be especially a health place where people go for health, short term. Some of the lower altitude parts, they go for the fabulous herbs, for hot springs, Tibetan spas. They have chanting by monks. They meditate. They forget their troubles. They go hiking in beautiful high mountains, the more macho ones, slowly after they acclimatize, and everything. And then my greatest one is the banking industry. By making it one country, two systems, the local government writes privacy laws, and then all the officials everywhere throughout Asia can have their numbered accounts in Tibet. They don't have to go to Switzerland, to Zurich. We can have gnomes of Tibet, who could be Chinese. Chinese can be the partners in these banks. And then they can buy Citigroup. Who's going to worry about some Tibetans buying Citigroup? They'd be worried about Beijing buying Citigroup, the congressmen would be all huffing and puffing until they got their payoffs. Their payolas and their campaign contributions, but still they get all nervous, like, can't buy our ports, can't buy all this and that. You know? Otherwise they've third worlded our country, like, effectively, almost totally. But the Tibetans could be a beautiful Switzerland. They could have data centers, and I think a UN branch would be appropriate, I envision. A UN branch where you have a real peace university, where the Tibetan mediation skill and the Dalai Lama's principle of dialogue and conflict resolution and not violence and not war becomes institutionalized. And the Dalai Lama can solve their border problems with India in a flash. And that will calm down the Indo-Pakistan issue. I mean, everywhere you see it unfolding. And then one of my friends even, the Dalai Lama then is turned loose in China to teach Buddhism. And there's a huge Buddhist revival, and the 750 million Chinese Buddhists go nuts because Kuan Yin is back. And Kuan Yin is telling them to do this and do that. And you know, there's one thing that I didn't discover, but my friend Alex Berzin, a Tibetan scholar Alex Berzin, told me that is truly brilliant, that if I'd known in time, I would have put in a book with of course, attribution. And that is, I know this too, that Chinese Buddhists are the best vegetarians amongst all Buddhists. The Tibetans will gobble up a yak while praying for its future life, anytime. The other Sri Lankans and Buddha eat plenty of fish. The Japanese will eat a whale in between Zen sessions, and they're all no good, you know, on the like love all sentient beings, but eat this one, you know. There's a hypocrisy there that is there. You have to face it. And Dalai Lama is trying to do better, and he himself is pretty vegetarian nowadays. And actually, the Tibetan monasteries in South India are getting more vegetarian, although some of the monks sneak out for burgers, you know, when they can, you know, into the nearby town. But the Chinese Buddhists are really excellent vegetarians. That they really do seriously, and they have the best cooking. Sweet and sour wood ears mixed with weird like things, the barnacles that grow off of trees up in some Taoist immortal place, and mushrooms of immortality, unbelievable, just like, you know, just like calf's liver or something, some fabulous mushroom. You can't even believe how good their cooking is. And they, by the huge Chinese population getting rekindled on Buddhism and going back to vegetarian cooking instead of pork morning, noon, and night, and therefore feeding corn from Iowa to pigs, in starting like commercial pig farms, which is what's happening now, part of the world grain supply going like this. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the problems. So by rekindling the Dharma in China, they'll really help their import budget and the world grain supply, hugely. Not to mention the the poor pigs. They'll cheer up. The Chinese pigs will be more happy and only rarely eaten. I think that's truly marvelous personally.